Hi. So we're on Parshat Tzav this week, second portion in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. And once again, Tzav, like last week's Vayikra portion, deals to a great extent with the rituals of korbanot, of sacrifices in the Mishkan and then in the sanctuary, and then later in the temple in Jerusalem. So I want to look first at chapter 6 in the book of Leviticus. And in the Chumash, it's page 613. And we read the following. This is the ritual of the burnt offering. Burnt offering itself shall remain where it is burned upon the altar all night until morning, while the fire on the altar is kept going on it. And then listen to this. The priest shall dress in linen raiment with linen breeches, pants next to his body, and he shall take up the ashes to which the fire has reduced the burnt offering on the altar and place them beside the altar. He shall then take off his vestments and put on other vestments and carry the ashes outside the camp to a pure place. The fire on the altar shall be kept burning, not to go out. Every morning the priest shall feed wood to it, lay out the burnt offering on it, turn into smoke the fat parts of the offerings of well-being. So the interesting thing here is the idea that this holy priest, the Kohen Gadol, every day, part of his responsibilities is to take a bucket and a shovel and a brush and to sweep up all the ashes from last night's sacrifice and then carry them outside the camp, right, and dump them in some place. And this is the guy who has contact with God in the sanctuary. This is the guy who brings the offerings into the altar, and this is the guy who every day has to clean up the ashes. You'd think that with a bureaucracy of Levites that somebody would have been given that job, but not so. So I was imagining that let's bring the past into today. Somebody who's a person of high position who has the job, takes on the job of cleaning up the place. So this is what I imagined. Monday morning at 8:09 a.m., Avi Cohen walked down the street and approached his family's business. As he always did, he glanced up at the sign over the store, Aaron Cohen and Sons. Of course, you'll pick up the reference there. Aaron Cohen is Aaron, the brother of Moses, who was the Kohen. But in this modern day retail store, Aaron Cohen and Sons. He noted the lights were on inside and the alarm had been turned off. He entered apprehensive of what he would find. In the back, he found his father, the founder of the business, with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, and a broom in his hand, sweeping the floor. "Dad, what are you doing?" Avi asked. "We're going to open soon, and I wanted to make sure that the store is ready for customers." "But Dad, we have guys on the maintenance staff who are supposed to do that. You're the owner of the business. You don't sweep floors or clean toilets." "The toilet I cleaned before I started sweeping." "Dad, a man of your position, and if you'll forgive me, of your age, shouldn't be cleaning toilets and sweeping floors. It's beneath your dignity. Listen, my dear but privileged son. All honest work, no matter how hard, no matter how menial, is ennobling. The help doesn't come in till later. And anyway, cleaning and sweeping to them is just a job. Their name isn't on the front of the building, ours is. I built this business and this building with my own two hands. I take great pride in it. When someone walks in, their first impression is not only about the merchandise, but about us as a family. And, if I may say so, sweeping up the schmutz teaches an important lesson about humility. Nobody is better than anyone else. It doesn't matter how much money you make, what college you went to, or what color your skin is. We are all God's children. You should never think you're better than anyone else. A good businessman must treat his customers with respect, and that means respect for the service we provide people and for physical place where we provide it. Oh, and one more thing. Can you take the trash out back to the dumpster? So the question is often raised, why does the Kohen Gadol have to do the shoveling and sweeping of the ashes from the altar? And again, as Aaron Cohen, the modern tale, would tell us, the idea is that any kind of work is important. And you know what? Even more so, work in a holy and a special place. So you can say there's the high work, the white collar work, and then there's low work, the blue collar work. If it's all in the temple, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. It's all service of God. And maybe it's to teach Aaron an important lesson. You're no better than anybody else, right? And don't think you're so high and mighty. And don't ever look down on people who are beneath you, so-called, and people who may not be as privileged in position as you are. So that's the first lesson from Parshat Tzav. We go to chapter 7 in Leviticus, and I want to look at verse 12. We've just talked about the burnt offering and the ashes from last night's offering and it being cleaned up the next morning. So then, chapter 7, they move on and they talk about the Zevach Shalamim, the peace offering or the sacrifice of well-being. And we're told that there were a couple of different categories of this. And in verse 12, chapter 7, book of Leviticus, it says, if he offers it for thanksgiving, so this is called the Korban Todah, thanksgiving offering, he shall offer together with the sacrifices of thanksgiving unleavened cakes with oil mixed in, unleavened wafers spread with oil, and cakes of choice flour with oil mixed in, well soaked. This offering with cakes of leavened bread added, he shall offer along with his thanksgiving sacrifice of well-being. Out of this he shall offer one of each kind as a gift to the Lord. It shall go to the priest who dashes the blood of the offering of well-being, and the flesh of his thanksgiving sacrifice of well-being shall be eaten on the day that it is offered. None of it shall be set aside until morning. The Torah tells us that one particular category of sacrifices was the thanksgiving sacrifice. So the question is, when would you bring it? Why would you bring it? What were the details? And the Torah itself doesn't give us any information. So it could be just if anybody felt a need to say thank you to God, there was a particular type of offering that you would bring to the temple as your way of expressing your gratitude to God. Later, in rabbinic times, first century, second century, third century, when there no longer was a temple in Jerusalem, the rabbi said, we need to have something that will take the place when we want to offer gratitude to God. We can't offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving. We should do something else. So what did they do? They came up with the notion of reciting a blessing. Today, we call that benching gomel. Bench is the Yiddish word for making a bracha, and gomel is the key word in the blessing. Gomel means to do something good for somebody. So the rabbis say that there were 4 occasions on which you would come to the temple, you would get an aliyah, and you would bench gomel. What were the 4 occasions? Number 1, if you had just returned on ship from a trip across the Mediterranean. Now, in those days, every time you got on board a ship and went across the sea, you were taking your life in your own hands. So if you made it back alive, one of the things you should do is come to the temple and bench gomel and say this blessing of gomel. Thank you, God. Second thing was, had you crossed the desert, to the west of Israel was the Mediterranean, to the east of Israel was desert. And if you're going through the desert, first of all, the elements could very easily kill you. Not only that, brigands and robbers, thieves could waylay you on the road and could kill you and take everything that you had. So if you went through the desert, made it back safe, that was an occasion for thanking God. Third one was if you were released from prison. Now you have to understand that rabbis in the first, second, third century are talking about people, Jews, who were imprisoned by the Romans for nationalistic reasons, not because they had committed some crime. They were being arrested because they were Jews, because of the things that they stood for, maybe even continuing to learn Torah when that was forbidden. And as bad as prison is today, in those days, people who were sent to prison perhaps didn't come out alive. And then the fourth reason for benching gomel was if you were ill and you had been cured. And so under those 4 circumstances, people would come and they would say this prayer. Today, the main reason that people bench gomel, I would say, when they come to synagogue, it's not about a trip on the Mediterranean. It's not about going through the desert. It's not about prison. It's more likely that they were in an accident and they survived. We've had a lot of people who were in a near fatal accident and they came to bench gomel to thank God that they made it through. And then the other reason we often have people come is after surgery, right? People were sick, they underwent surgery, and they were doing pretty well. So those were the 4 reasons originally, and today it comes down to accidents or surgery. What's the procedure? You would come to shul on a day when the Torah is read, either a Monday or a Thursday or a Shabbos. You let somebody know, I need to bench gomel. Those are the magic words, and immediately you would be given an aliyah. So what would happen is you come up, you'd say the blessing over the Torah, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim. They'd read from the Torah. You'd say the blessing after the reading, Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emet. And then immediately after that second blessing, you would say the Gomel blessing, HaGomel L'Chayavim Tovot. Right? We praise God who does acts of kindness, acts of helping out people. HaGomel L'Chayavim Tovot. And people who don't necessarily warrant or are not necessarily deserving, but God nevertheless helps us anyway. Shed Malani Kol Tov. And we say, because God has done only good for me. So you recite this blessing. It's found in the Siddur. Most people don't know it by heart. You come, you say the blessing. They show you in the book where it is. You say the bracha. And then the congregation responds. Mi shegmalcha kol tov. May he, God, who did wondrous things for you, Hui Malel Selah. May he bless, may he continue to do good for you and for all of us. Amen Selah. So that's the tradition of benching Gomel. Starts with a sacrifice in the book of Leviticus, and then in rabbinic times, it continues with this blessing that's been added. So here's what I imagined happening. Again, one of the premises of this course is that in order to understand the Torah, nothing new is under the sun. Whatever was is what goes on today. And what goes on today is probably what happened way back then. So here's what I'm imagining. There's a couple. Let's say, because we don't want to just pick an anonymous couple, let's pick Moses' sister, Miriam, and according to the rabbis, Miriam was married to Caleb, right? Kalev ben Yefuna. You may recall that when the 12 spies were sent, 10 of them bring back a bad report, 2 bring back a good report. Who are the 2? Joshua and Kalev ben Yefuna, Caleb. And according to rabbinic tradition, not in the Torah, but rabbinic tradition, we're told that Miriam and Kalev got married. So I'm imagining that this power couple, after all, she is the sister of Moses, and he was one of the 2 people who were key in the of the spies, the one who was trying to convince the people this is a good thing, a good place we're going to. I'm imagining that they sent out an invitation. I even printed up a mock invitation in special font, and imagine that everybody got an invitation, that the people at the time in the desert all received an invitation from Miriam and Caleb. And this is what the invitation said. Please join us in shul this Shabbos when we give thanks to God for all his mercies. And then they list 4 things. Freeing us from the prison of Egyptian slavery. You'll notice the prison of the 4 rabbinic things. Splitting the sea and leading us through it also brings us back to somebody who took a sea journey. Providing us food and water in the desert, manna and water, and a trip through the desert, and sending healing for the disease of Tzara'an, Tzara'at is the Hebrew word. We often translate it as leprosy. And whether it was leprosy or not, hard to know. Could very well have been psoriasis or eczema, some kind of skin problem. But notice that the four things that Miriam and Caleb speak about are actually a mirror image of the four things the rabbis said you go to the synagogue to bench gomel for. Also, that fourth one, sending healing for the disease of tzara'at. Remember that Miriam herself is going to be afflicted with the disease of tzara'at, and for a period of time, she's going to have to be quarantined until the disease passes and she's healed. And so she's really drawing on a personal experience here. So as part of the invitation, please join us when we give thanks and then listing the four events that everyone had gone through. And then the bottom of the invitation reads as follows. Tefillot begin at 9 a.m. sharp at the Ohel Moed. Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, another word for the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the wilderness. The Gomel blessing will be recited during the Torah service. A Kiddush will follow featuring shawarma in pita. Back in those days, right, one of the things they did have were sheep. So shawarma is what we call roasted lamb and eaten in a pita. That's a pretty common treat in Israel today, second only to falafel. And then the invitation is signed by Miriam bat Amram and Kalev ben Yefuna. So there we have a kind of a modern update on the notion of the benching gomel and the sacrifice of thanksgiving. We come to the chapter 8 in the book of Leviticus, and here in verse 22, we read the following. He brought forward the second ram, the ram of ordination. Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the ram's head, and it was slaughtered. Moses took some of its blood and put it on the ridge of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Moses then brought forward the sons of Aaron and put some of the blood on the ridges of their right ears, and on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. And the rest of the blood Moses dashed against every side of the altar. He took the fat, the broad tail, and all the fat above the entrails, the protuberance of the liver, and the two kidneys and their fat, and the right thigh. So here we see the ritual of ordination. Now, think about it. In America, president is inaugurated. How do we do that? Well, there's a fancy ceremony. You put your hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. You repeat the oath after the Chief Justice, word for word. And then do this on the right day at the exact moment, and you are now the new president, formally inaugurated. Think about a coronation. In a country where there is a monarchy, they take the crown, and by coronation, we place the crown on the head of the monarch, and now they are officially king or queen. The question is, what do we do about a religious authority. So according to the Torah, what we're told here is that there was a sacrifice that they would bring, and then very strange ritual. A little blood on the ear, a little blood on the thumb, a little blood on the toe. And the Torah doesn't give us a clue what the symbolism of that could be. What's that all about? Why would we do such a thing? And so this was my attempt to try to understand the ritual and what the symbolism of it was. So once again, the verses say, he brought forward the ram of ordination, and it was slaughtered. Moses took some of the blood, put it on the ridge of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. So here's what I'm imagining. Let's take 3,000 years ago. We're now about to ordain Aaron as the Kohen Gadol. But the only thing that we can really relate it to is a presidential inauguration. So what would happen if we would mix these two things, one from the past, one from our present? And here's how I imagine it would go. Moses says, "Are you ready to take the oath of office?" And Aaron says, "Yes." Moses says, "Please repeat after me. I, Aharon ben Amram," remember Moses and Aaron's father was Amram. "I, Aharon ben Amram, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of Kohen Gadol, high priest. And I will, to the best of my ability, with my ears listen to their pleas, with my hands present their offerings, and with my feet run to bring about peace between people." Okay, so here I'm attempting to understand why the ear, why the thumb, why the foot. So it's listen to people, not just speak at them. It's present their offerings, and it's also with my feet, that's why the big toe, the right foot, run to bring about peace between people. What I was alluding to here is that in rabbinic literature, Aaron is considered the man of peace. And one of the well-known stories about Aaron is that when he heard two people got into a fight, people who had been good friends, what did he do? He went to the first guy and he said, "You know, I was just talking to your friend. He feels really terrible about the fight that you guys got into. But, you know, he's a little proud and it's hard for him to say, 'I'm sorry.' But I know that he really feels that. You know what? If you were to go and if you were to be the big one, and if you were to say first, 'You know what? I feel terrible about what happened to us,' I'm sure he would meet you more than halfway. And I'm sure the two of you could reconcile and come together." What did Aaron then do? He went to the other guy and he told him the exact same story. So he primed both of these friends to be in the state of mind of saying they're sorry and of reconciling. Well, the two guys see each other, and remembering what Aaron had told them, they each begin to say, "I'm sorry." And then they laugh because they both said it at the same time. They shake hands, they hug, and the fight is over. They're reconciled. Based on this, the rabbis teach us that when Moses dies, it says in the Torah, and Israel mourned him. When Aaron died, it said, and all Israel mourned him. So people said, Len?
People said when?
right by the door, the yellow books.
Thank you.
Excuse me,
Okay.
as many as you want.
Thank you.
So when Moses dies, what happens? People respected him, but a lot of times they were angry at him. A lot of times they feared him, so they mourned him. On the other hand, when Aaron died, we're told all Israel mourned him. Why? Because Aaron dedicated his life to trying to help people, to bring people together, to reconcile old friends who got into a fight. And so that third thing, with my feet, run to bring about peace between people. And then the oath continues, from my head to my toes, I will devote myself to God, to the Torah, and to the people Israel. So help me God. And Aaron repeats, I imagine, repeats this oath of office. And at that point, Moses shakes his brother's hand and he says, congratulations, Mr. Kohen Gadol. Just as the Chief Justice would say at inauguration, congratulations, Mr. President. Okay, so sort of another attempt to bring together the past and the present, hopefully for the point of having us understand this mysterious ritual, ear, thumb, toe, and maybe there is an important symbolism in it. So I wanted to share the following with you for the Haftorah. You should know that this Shabbos is a special Shabbos called Shabbat Hagadol, the Saturday before Passover. And we have a special Haftorah. But I wanted to share with you the regular Haftorah that would have been read for Tzav if it wasn't the Saturday before Passover. We'll talk this Shabbos a little bit more about that special Haftorah, but for tonight, I wanted to look at the regular Haftorah for Tzav. And it's from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 7. Whenever we hear Jeremiah, we need to think about a man, a prophet, who came to the Jewish people around the year 600 BCE. And Jeremiah was mainly sent to bring messages of warning. You could even say messages of doom to the people. That what he was saying is, if you don't obey God, if you don't change your ways, then you are going to be punished. So Jeremiah did this for a number of years, and ultimately the people didn't heed his warning. They continued to do things that upset God. And finally, in the year 586 BCE, the Babylonians come down from Bavel, which today would be Iraq, and destroy Jerusalem, burn the temple, slaughter hundreds of thousands of Jews, and exile the survivors to Babylonia. So here we see in chapter 7 of the book, we see one of the speeches that Jeremiah gave, warning the people. And in particular, the sin that he is speaking about is the worship of Moloch. Now, Moloch was an idol, a god, worshipped by the local peoples, perhaps the Canaanites and others. Moloch, the three letters that make up the name, mean king, but the vowels, Molech, instead of Melech, which is king, Molech is taking the vowels from the word Boshet. Boshet in Hebrew means shame. So in a sense, calling this god Moloch was the Hebrews' way of saying, You may think he's a god, but he's a disgrace. What this God stands for and what people do in worshiping him is a disgrace. It's a shame. It's a stain on all of us. So let me just read a few verses, you'll get an idea. This is what Jeremiah says to the people. For the people of Judah have done what displeases me, declares the Lord. They have set up their abominations in the house which is called by my name, and they have defiled it. So we see that at this point, there were idols in the temple in Jerusalem. Apparently, the king, the Jewish king, and the priests were allowing this to take place. And they have built the shrines of Tophet in the valley of Ben Hinnom to burn their sons and daughters in fire, which I never commanded, which never came to my mind. Couple of things. Right outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, there's a valley. Right? Jerusalem is sort of built on a hill. You've got the hill of Mount Zion, you've got the hill of Mount of Olives, you've got the hill of Mount Moriah, all these hills. And between the hills, you've got valleys. One of the valleys, right outside the walls of the old city, was called the Valley of Ben Hinnom. Probably the original owners were the family of this guy Hinnom, and his sons inherited it. So now this is the valley of the sons of Hinnom. In Hebrew called Gay meaning, in Hebrew meaning a valley. Gay Ben Hinnom. That's important because later, because of the terrible things that happened there, especially with fire, we'll get to that in a second, this place became known as Gay Ben Hinnom, and later was shortened to Gay Hinnom. Gay Hinnom, literally the Valley of Hinnom. Now, Christians took this idea and said, this is the worst thing that there possibly could be. And because of the fire that's involved, they later referred to hell as Gehenna, right? Or in Hebrew, Gehinnom. So not only the Christians, but even Jews, when thinking about the worst thing that there ever could be, referred to it as Gehenna. And that becomes the Hebrew word for hell, especially for the Christians who believed in that. So what was so terrible? What was going on? Well, the statue of Moloch. Imagine a life-size or maybe even larger statue carved out of stone. Okay? And imagine that the stone god had hands that were like this. Right? Again, a sculpture made out of stone. And because of the way the hands were and the arms were next to each other, it was almost like a sliding board. Then imagine that in place the stomach was open. And what would happen would be that they would build, people who worship Moloch would build a fire in that pit where the stomach was. And what would people do? They would come with little children and babies, and they would offer the baby up to Moloch. And they would put the baby on the top of this sliding board and then let go. And the baby would tumble down the two arms straight into the pit, which was on fire. Now, why would people do such a thing? Well, if you were desperate, right, you'd be willing to sacrifice a child to a god if you felt that there was something even greater that was necessary for our country, for our people. And people would do this, would sacrifice little children or babies to the fire god, to the god of Moloch, being burned alive in the fire. Well, you can imagine what Jeremiah thought about this. You can imagine what God thought about this. And the fact that this was taking place just outside the walls of the city of Jerusalem by Jews. So I'm imagining the following scene. Jeremiah exited the southern gate of the city of Jerusalem and stood in the valley of Ben Hinnom. He looked eastward to the Kidron Valley and the wilderness. He heard the sounds of beating drums coming from an area of the Gay Ben Hinnom known as the Tophet, the place of drums. In modern Hebrew, a toph is a drum. So Tophet, the place of drums. He noticed off in the distance a small crowd, and he gravitated towards them. He saw a family, including a mother, holding a small child. There were priests, but not Kohanim or Leviim, dressed in colorful robes. And there was a bronze statue of the Canaanite god Moloch, 7 cubits high. Remember, a cubit is a foot and a half. A few of the priests were chanting hymns. Some of the words sounded familiar, but the language was Canaanite. And a few of the priests were adding wood to the fire in the hollow, lower section of the idol. The crying of the child was drowned out by the drums. Jeremiah interrupted the ceremony of the worshippers of Moloch with a tirade. The Lord has rejected and cast off this people who have provoked his wrath. You have done that which displeases me, says the Lord. You have built these shrines which God did not command. The time is coming when this area will no longer be called the Valley of Ben Hinnom, but rather the Valley of Slaughter. So many people will die here, and their bodies shall be food for the birds of the sky and the wild animals of the earth. Their bones will not be buried, but shall be as dung. And those who are slaughtered will be the lucky ones. Death shall be preferable to life for this wicked nation. Never again will there be heard in the streets of Jerusalem and in the courtyards of Judah the sounds of mirth and gladness, the voices of brides and grooms. The whole land shall fall into ruin. This is very interesting because these last verses, and I will silence in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride. This becomes the basis of the Jewish wedding ceremony, right? So what Jeremiah said, well, there will no longer be heard in Jerusalem weddings, right? Because there will be only terrible things happening and tragedy and death. No more weddings and happiness and partying. So that was the original. Later, the Jewish people take those lines after the destruction and they flipped them around and they made them say the opposite. Od Yishama Biarei Yehuda. Once again, in the future, there will be heard Biarei Yehuda v'chutzot Yerushalayim, in the cities of Judah, in the courtyards of Jerusalem. Kol sason v'kol simcha, the sounds of laughter, of happiness, of mirth, of partying. Right? So what originally Jeremiah said as a curse, the Jewish people later turned around and made those same words mean the day will come when we will again come back to Jerusalem and we will have weddings and celebrations and partying. Those who had come to worship Moloch waited until Jeremiah had finished his speech. The father then took his child from his wife's arms and handed the little boy to the priest. The priest took the crying child, approached the idol, and threw the child into the fire. Here's an example, it seems to me, of, if you were to give this Haftorah to a bar and bat mitzvah kid, this speech would be way above them. Sometimes if we take the time and if we study the portion, at least an adult does, what we find is something that is so dramatic, like this story. It's difficult to win kids over and to make them understand highfalutin words. But if we told them the story of what Jeremiah saw and what upset him and why he came to condemn the people and what they were doing, then I think a 13-year-old would certainly understand what was going on, and more importantly, would understand the importance in our history of the prophets, and who dared to stand up, often by themselves, against crowds and maybe even a whole people, a whole nation, to stand for what they believed, what was right. So that's the Haftorah for Tzav. We'll break it here. We'll pick up in about 15 minutes or so with the Mariv service.